they would have had him on the stand. They say, okay, Mr. Deal, you mentioned that you were at the Peterson Auto Museum that night. Yes, sir, that's correct. And you also mentioned that you were carrying a gun that night. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Did you have a California concealed weapons permit? No.
Right, exactly. That's a good point. What do you think about Gene saying him being a parole officer, and he's saying, I'm not sure if he has mentioned any of this in his original police statements, but he said that he had like at least 3 guns. Had 2 in his waist, one is one of his ankle. The motherfucker sounds like Rambo to me with all these guns he had on him in LA somewhere. You know what I mean? So how is like someone like him would even get his hands on some guns? Like if you're flying from New York to LA, like how do you put that together? I don't know. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. And that would have been the first question that the attorneys in the Wallace case would have asked him. They would have had him on the stand. They say, okay, Mr. Deal, you mentioned that you were at the Peterson Auto Museum that night. Yes, sir, that's correct. And you also mentioned that you were carrying a gun that night. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Did you have a California concealed weapons permit? No. Did you realize that it's against the law to carry a gun in California without a weapons permit? Yes, no, however he answers it. So what you're telling us, Mr. Deal, is this, is that the night that this all took place, you were already committing a crime, right? You're already in violation of concealed weapons law. So, right? Because this is all prior to HR 218. This is all prior to when law enforcement officers can go and get an interstate license to carry.
Right.
Yeah, you only get a license to carry back then within the state that you're employed as a parole officer, police officer, whatever it might be. And so, and he wouldn't have been able to fly with a gun. So if he flew out to California, he couldn't have taken it on a plane. So if he in fact had a gun, he had to get here, go find one to carry while he's here, and then carry it around in violation of the law. And so this would have been one of the first questions they'd have asked him in courts, like, Mr. Deal, did you have a concealed weapons permit? And he wouldn't have been able to have one because he's not a resident here and he's not a police officer here. And so he wouldn't have had one. And so when he makes these claims, it kind of indicts himself that, first of all, I was already breaking the law that night. If in fact he had a gun. I don't know if he did or not. He claims he did, so let's just take him at his word. So then, multiple guns, whatever, obviously, regardless, it didn't matter, right?
Right.
You gun or not, it didn't change anything.
Right.
And it, clearly you weren't in a position to protect Biggie. You weren't even in the same car.
Right.
And if Gene Deal says, "Oh, I had a," show the receipts. If you're going to come back and say that, because he's probably going to say, "No, I had a," show the receipts. Show that you had a weapons. Show that you had a concealed weapons permit in California in 1997.
Right. I was just gonna, yeah, exactly.